Shift Happens podcast.
Today, we're thrilled to dive deep into the world of AI and its impact on the digital workplace from a data and risk management perspective with Julia Glidden, Board Chair of Pivotl. We explore the opportunities, risk, and ethical considerations surrounding AI. Get ready for an enlightening conversation that will challenge your perspective and provide valuable insights for navigating AI in the digital workplace.
Shift Happens podcast. Shift Happens podcast.
And Julia, what have you been up to lately? I think last we talked, you were still working for a small company in Redmond.
Small company in Redmond running a small business across the public sector around the world. And now chairing a data and AI startup, which is very timely for today's discussion, and doing a lot of thinking and writing and speaking again and working at the UN, doing some expert advising.
Awesome. And where are you based out of these days? You still up in
Northern New England.
New England?
So I can see Canada from my mountain.
And do you travel much out to UK since the business out there?
Yeah, it's lovely, the post-COVID world, to be back to traveling. And the first trip I did to London, I think this time a year ago, was just panic, crisis. How do you pack a bag? And I'm
Great, great. And so let's talk about the current work that you do. Can you tell us more about Pivotal? We've read a lot of good things about it. Focus on data, right? Because a lot of organizations just talk about being data driven and digital transformation. But seems like with Pivotal, it's dead focused to really make data work with a layered approach to data. So can you share more about that and why it's really exciting for you and your organization?
Well, what I loved about Pivotal is its data to its core, data first. When you start looking at a lot of companies, big and small, data is a kind of add-on to the transformation that they're trying to sell or help drive or work internally. And what Pivotal starts with is the foundation for digital transformation, which is data, because if that foundation is faulty, everything else is like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You're trying to get it back straight. So, and it's also data end to end, from the governance and strategy through to execution, through to business analytics, and then ultimately, of course, AI. So the full end client journey spectrum maturity model approach, with data foundational to its core, and then of course with my global public sector background, the company's also steeped in public sector, works across commercial enterprise. But I'm a big believer, if you crack public sector, you crack the global marketplace. So it's a very exciting time and place for me to be at this next stage in my career.
That's excellent. Can you talk to us a little bit more about risk management? How do you guide your clients as they think about some of the challenges and the impact of data during transformation journey? How do you approach risk?
Well, coming from a public sector background, the first element and the first question we have to talk about with our clients is the risk of doing nothing, because public sector is a notoriously risk adverse context and operating environment. And I like to say, and rightly so, it's not WASI, the new bank app, or the new emoji. If you're transforming social services, children at risk can fall through the cracks and die if the transformation doesn't work. And public sector has, a shaky background on digital transformation. But what COVID taught us, and then I would also argue the Ukraine crisis, tragedy, war, is that there's times in life when the risk of doing nothing is greater than the risk of doing something. And so shifting, and by the way, I love the title of this podcast. I absolutely love it, because digital transformation also starts with shifting a mindset away from, in public sector often, why not, to why, right? Why in the commercial enterprise is shareholder value, return on investment, money. That's an easy one. But the why not in public sector is a bigger challenge. And COVID showed that for the first time, the risk of doing nothing was bigger than the risk of doing something. But it also applies to commercial enterprise.
Maybe a follow-up on that. We do hear organizations get very fragmented when they think about the transformation and the ownership of what happens to the data. What's the most important aspect of helping an organization deal with that fragmentation? This is the type of thing that often paralyzes them.
It's easier said than done, and I feel like a broken record because for 25 years we've been trying to overcome silos within individual organizations, individual teams, individual agencies. But it really does start with adapting a holistic system approach to transformation. It's not a, we talked about data as the foundation. Data is the foundation for leveraging technology to drive change. Change is about people. So you have to take that holistic, back to the old adage, people, process, technology. And then you have to build cross organizational, cross matrix teams where everybody feels part of the change. It's not something that happens to them, it's something they co create together. Again, easier said than done. But if you just have your digital transformation team or your data team off in the attic that's going to come and do things to teams, we know how fast that change goes down the rabbit hole of, nothing really happens but a great strategy.
Along that lines, Julia, let's unpack that further, right? Because I'm sure you've seen this in a lot of organizations, highly regulated or commercial organizations, where they think of digital transformation as a pure exercise of deploying technology to automate and make processes more efficient. But to your point, it's all about people. And when we think about people, it's really what impacts them from a day to day perspective. We have 50,000 foot view of digital transformation, but if we trickle it down to the day to day work, how do you see this idea of risk management in the digital workplace, especially as you mentioned with COVID? Now we've got hybrid work, or some people are fully remote work. Where are the, I would say, layers of risk management come through in our new digital workplace?
I'll use another old adage about physician heal thyself. I've worked in some big organizations that are out selling digital transformation to clients, and then you get back at the ranch and try to do an expense report. Try try to get anybody on a pre-COVID on a video conference, right? So you have to then go back to, okay, what are you trying to achieve? It is not about overlaying technology so that the workplace seems sexy for younger generations. It's about transforming the employee experience in a way that they can identify, work better, work more efficiently, but also understand what we're trying to do on behalf of our clients. And so, again, that comes back to putting the person first and foremost. I am a huge advocate for human centered design and design thinking and starting with the persona. I've seen it work wonders. And again, I would ask, companies to start with the persona of their employee. What's the employee day-to-day experience and what happens the first time they spend a half an hour trying to, access the expense report system and then have it be rejected? They're out the door the first time a better offer comes.
Yeah, that's very true. Retaining talent as you're trying to transform the business is difficult, especially with a new workforce generation coming into the workplace where their expectations tend to be quite different. Julia, let's pivot slightly to regulation. How do you see the blend of regulation also affecting the knowledge workers' experience? Dux and I are out speaking with clients often, and we hear the struggles they express to us are, how is the organization going to provide employees or the workplace more freedom to collaborate and share data? But then, of course, in a highly regulated industry, it's really a challenge. And so there's always that struggle. How much freedom do you give the workplace so that they could collaborate more effectively wherever they are? But at the same time, if we have regulations, especially around data sharing policies, how do we deal with that?
So the former digital transformation czar in the UK Cabinet Office coined a phrase back, I think, 15 years ago, data huggers, right? And data huggers, I love it because the data huggers always say why you can't. Oh, you guys can share your data. Great for your agency, great for your, but mine is different. And that is an embedded mindset that's part of human nature. Everybody loves the idea of change except my organization because no one understands my organization. And how you overcome that mindset, and I've seen it happen time and time again around the world, is you posit the question, why not? And you embed in policy, whether it's government policy or corporate policy, that you have to start with the question, why not share the data? And there are good reasons not to share the data. It's my health data, or if you share my health data and my demographic data, you can link up and figure out who I am in a data pool, right? There are very good risk management and tiers of assessments and tools to do that. But once you posit the risk of doing nothing, the why not, that shifts to the theme of today in the podcast. It shifts the mindset into a proactive can do, and it places an onus of responsibility on an agency or an organization to embrace change and be part of that solution versus simply coming in with a negative mindset and a why not. And it works across any industry, but particularly regulated industries, you're going to find, oh no, you don't understand. And that P for policy, right? Where policy, procurement, and product come together. Policy becomes the big, but actually, when you go underneath the hood of a lot of policies, there is a lot of yes, you can, not no, we can't.
Another term I've heard similar to data huggers is data hoarders, right? You see the TV show Hoarders, right?
Yeah.
It's similar. Well, I'll need it just in case. And and around that, I mean, in your tenure in a lot of different companies and your global scope, can you share a story that you've seen, or a customer you work with, or a government agency um, that throughout this transformation, especially in the last couple of years, embrace a lot of this thinking around people-centered design versus being reactive, and what's the impact to these to this organization?
So one of the uh, Nine Eyes, so I won't name the client, but one of the Nine Eyes, big defense agency. It's a hilarious story. I get dropped off in the meat district of a beautiful capital city that used to be the red light district and is now turned into studio garage design thinking. It's pre-dawn, and the taxi driver says, "Do you really want to stay here?" Yeah, a corporate executive turned into, but so get in. And the generals are in this funky, the plants are everywhere, the open office, and they're standing there, if you could see me, with their arms folded and their general scowl, and they're just completely, oh my God, the kids are making me do this. Well, we start the design thinking, what keeps General X up at night? The persona, the problem statement. Of course, we're all jumping in. And the no, that's not what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is the system not working when the soldier, the internet air gap isn't working. And once again, co-design, owning a problem, once the light went off, the CIO told us years of trying to bring his internal stakeholders along in terms of what needed to be done changed overnight. And by the end of the day, we had more content for an executable strategy. Not, strategies are easy to write. Whether or not they're executable is whether or not they reflect the problems of the stakeholders and the stakeholders are bought in. And that was probably one of the most powerful examples of shifting thinking. This is pre-Ukraine. And you can only imagine now how happy those stakeholders are that they did embrace the change and start to transform.
That's remarkable. One of the other aspects of the transformation challenge that we're seeing is starting to surface is AI. Specifically, how does AI really come into the mix of that transformation? And of course, there's the hype of AI, and I think we're still in the early phases of that hype, but we're starting to see interest developing into real practice. And I'm curious, in your view, on the work that you're doing with your teams around operational requirements, how are the operational requirements going to have to change as a result of AI?
Well, I mentioned the fact that one of the things I really love and am most excited about Pivotal, particularly at this point in time with the AI hype cycle, but it may quickly go into the execution cycle, as you indicated, Mario, faster than we've experienced before, is data is the core, and it's end to end. And I talked about end to end being starting with the foundations. I think when you start looking at where regulation, we've talked about regulation a lot on this podcast, where regulatory thinking is going, it is based on risk. Topic of this podcast today, risk and risk assessments. Now, those risks come from use cases. Yes, the risk of using AI for medical purposes or policing purposes, and it goes awry. But risk also comes back to that, pivotal foundation, data. And there's a lot of organizations that I don't think have begun to really think about and analyze the risk of the data they're using, the data they're they're leveraging, whether it's internal or external, the state of that data, the IPR associated with that data, the downstream consequences of putting a product in the market that is used on open data, but they don't have licenses for, right? So there's some serious foundational issues that organizations need to really start to think about. And what we're finding in the marketplace is in the past, data was kind of an add-on to digital transformation, not the foundation, but yeah, we need you got to feed the cloud to do the stuff we want to do. So we got to put some data in. Well, in the era of AI, it's either going to make or break your organization. And the foundations in terms of governance, access, security, control are more important than ever because the consequences, let's imagine the lawsuits. Or using open data sets that you don't have access to and IPR is valid. The next thing you know, you've done a deep fake without knowing it on the back of a multi-gazillion dollar singer's estate exposure. So governance and the foundations of data governance come seriously into play. And I think a lot of organizations have to go back to that Tower of Pisa now and start to try to correct the foundation.
You bring up a fantastic point, Julia. So last week I was in town with government customer, your old stomping grounds here in DC. And they're like, so Dux, what do you think of Microsoft Copilot? This is really exciting. We don't have to do the mundane work anymore. It'll just listen to a meeting and tell us what to do. And it seems like people want the easy button. But I started unpacking this, right? I said, look, it's not about telling ChatGPT or Copilot to create a PowerPoint from a Word document. Somebody still needs to produce that. That's one. And second is the data, the integrity of the data has to be there because these are just tools. They're not, we're not in the far future where they'll think for us, right? And I think that's what people are missing.
Thank goodness.
And the way it's being marketed, it's like, oh, it's this easy button. You don't have to work anymore. It'll do everything for you.
And that's where the risk, that is where the genuine risk, garbage in, garbage out. These cliches are cliches for a reason. If the data you're putting into the PowerPoint or the Word document is based on, we already know AI can have hallucinations. It's a black box. So it's creating faulty legal cases. It's creating plagiarized, books that don't exist. So you're using that as the basis of your pitch to a client. And the next thing you know, you don't know the provenance of the data, the tagging, the IPR rights, and you are in turn reiterating the hallucination, the faulty black box. And I don't think there's enough awareness. That's not to say sometimes an easy button has functionality, but that's where I really like the EU's risk model. Chat boxes, when I call a call center, as long as you let me know I'm not talking to a human, really is yes or no. Do I want to renew my, mobile app? Sure. But when it comes to my healthcare or policing or, my private details, absolutely cannot risk the garbage in, garbage out. And the EU pyramid gives us a good starting framework. But the hardest challenge to the theme of it's all about people is helping people to understand. We're human beings and we want the easy path. There's no easy button. We don't get the foundations right. We are going to get very dangerous and faulty outputs that we'll be trying to correct for you. We may never be able to correct.
That's very true. The trustworthiness and I think also conventional controls must change in order for the organization to realize the true value and the impact that AI can have. I'm curious also if you see the public sector being a bit more hesitant to adopt AI, or are you seeing an eagerness to shift?
It's always a delicate balancing act with the public sector. And I say, it's very easy to say, oh, they don't do anything, they're stodgy. Again, public sector is a vocation. People go into it not to make money, not to have big splashy legacies, but to improve lives. And lives are at stake when you embrace something new. So that hesitation is something that I encourage everyone to understand, lean in, embrace, and help. Because again, the risk of doing nothing can be greater. Now, interestingly, I've spent my entire career driving public sector innovation, tech adoption, keeping pace with the private sector. And this is the first time in my entire career where I've had this, like, I feel like this epiphany where I think we do need regulation. And I do think government needs to lead with a more hesitant approach. And I've started to advocate at expert groups that I've been on at the EU and the UN, um, not to be measuring AI adoption, because what we measure is what we do. I think we need more hesitancy. And one of my concerns, Mario, to your question is this is one where I'm actually seeing the public sector perhaps lean in too fast and too quickly. And I never thought you'd see me say that.
That is interesting. Well, there's also from a value perspective, many want to present stronger value to remain competitive. So there's the early adopters of technology and new methods to drive insights. And this leads to early implementation. But ultimately, you're right. Regulation needs to really catch up. The guardrails must be in place to ensure proper use of the technology. For example, it was interesting to see several years back when we first started thinking about general data protection regulations, GDPR, and we started considering the types of automation that we could provide to improve the data protection. But the guidelines on how to implement transparent and non-transparent controls were somewhat vague at first. Through that shift, we saw the industry realized that there was still going to be a lot of education required on GDPR before we could actually go and implement these technologies responsibly. Do you feel the same will occur with this new paradigm of extracting data value with AI? And that we have to do a lot of education and at the same time fast track regulation?
I think it's more incumbent than ever for those of us that are practitioners and have had the real privilege of being at the forefront of tech and, like I said, hype curves and cycles, and then real positive and powerful societal impact, whether as a consumer or as a citizen. I think it's more important than ever for those of us in that category to be advocates for informed education, to make sure I read an hour a day now on data and AI, and not just because I have the privilege of being the chair of Pivotl, but because this is an inflection point like we've never seen before. And the consequences of getting it wrong are greater than they've ever been, for better and for worse. I don't want to just be doomed. There's a lot of opportunity and upside, obviously. But Dux, as you said, people want the easy button. And the easy button, as I said, can be garbage in, garbage out. So there's even more education about the risks and what it takes to minimize those risks. And again, I think it comes back to data, data governance, data strategy, data controls, data tagging, data provenance.
And is this the same thinking now you're sharing or providing guidance with the UN itself? Because I know UN, there's a lot of working groups looking into this heavily now between AI, between upcoming technologies, and how to help and equip, especially developing countries, to maximize this.
I mean, the UN it's been really fascinating over the last 15 years. I've had the privilege of being um, party to the UNE government survey almost from its inception through, and at every stage, from expert working groups to editing to just inputting years ago, saying, you got to do smart cities. And I said, but we only measure nation states. I said, no, smart cities are coming. AI and data cloud, the UN started to measure 4 years ago. So when we're looking at what the 2024 expert working group is, this is where a lot of the UN working groups come together for the UNE government survey. What are we measuring? We've been advocating and raising awareness across the spectrum of states, from leaders like the UK and Denmark and Australia. Fortunately, US has ebbs and flows in the top 10. Singapore, what are those governments doing? What are we measuring? Because then capacity constrained countries tend to watch and follow. And so I think the next set of surveys, whether it's the UNE government survey, the OECD, the World Bank surveys, it's going to be really important for us to make sure we're not just got 10 AI enabled services, tick, you're in advanced, because I think that's a very dangerous approach at this point in time. I think that is like 19th century regulation for the 20th century, right? We needed to prod how many services did you offer via the internet and then via mobile 10 and 15 years ago. But AI, I think, is a different kettle of fish, and we need to take a. I don't want to use the word pause and sound like I just signed Elon Musk's letter, but we need to take a pause before we start proselytizing it and make sure people genuinely understand what it can and can't do, and we don't lose the human touch.
100%. I mean, it's encouraging to see a lot of the tech leaders. Sam Altman from OpenAI is actually pushing, at least here in the U.S., the government to step in and let's work together. Let's get ahead of this versus being reactive again. And one day sitting in a congressional hearing talking about why did you let this app loose, right?
I think it's encouraging, and as I said, I've been surprised at my own reaction. Years of saying, "Come on, don't overregulate, don't regulate for World War One when it's World War III." And I'm now like, "Okay, wait a minute. We all need to work together, a genuine public-private civil society partnership and approach." So that's encouraging. That's the positive. The negative and the thing that keeps me up at night is if the creators of the technology are worried, we should be worried, right? If they're asking for help and guardrails, they know more than we know, but they also know what they don't know. They don't know why hallucinations, why AI can lie. They don't quite know what's in the black box. That's a little worrying. I'm worried.
Yeah, absolutely. The boundaries, you no longer have a sense of boundaries. Usually with tech, you always sort of need, well, from a creative point of view, where you can keep pushing it, but you're so right about that. The other aspect of this is quality of information and trust in the output. For instance, we're starting to see organizations think of improving the quality of their operational capabilities. And if there is trust in the AI output, then that perceived quality of the output would be high. And so that's certainly going to play a role in how the organization allows these operations to rely on AI methods. I'm curious, when you have those conversations, are we, overcomplicating things now and saying, well, AI is there for, you to gain efficiency, but now I have to add additional controls and measures to understand its quality. In your view, what do you think is the right balance?
Again, I think a risk matrix, and I think we're going to see consensus, much like GDPR became the global standard for data protection. I recently wrote a blog on AI ethics and regulation, and it is fascinating but predictable. So you've got the US and now the UK post Brexit pushing technology innovation. We don't want to stifle entrepreneurship. And that is why those two countries are such technological innovation juggernauts. China pushing an industrial policy, pro transparency, pro consumer trust and safety in the data and in the use of AI, but very little belief that they're going to apply it to government functions. Um, and then Europe saying we need a measured risk-based approach, right? Taking that third way again, rooted in trust, security, and levels of risk. Low risk call centers, fine, absolutely no need for regulation. A little higher up risk of talking to my doctor's office about scheduling an appointment, medium tier, up to the highest risk where lives and freedoms are at stake. And it's a very simple pyramid. I would encourage everyone to take a look at it because it simplifies the complex into what is this use for? Because again, when we talk about transformation with our clients, what do you want to achieve? What is the end goal? And then what is the risk of it going wrong? And I think the EU's risk pyramid provides a good middle path between all in tech innovation, anything goes Wild West, which is what brought the brilliance of Silicon Valley. And hey, let's just do nothing because we like our, piazzas and 14th century paintings.
That's exactly one of the things that especially Mario talks a lot of investment bankers, investors, and these are the questions. These are the things people are excited about, no doubt, especially from a innovation growth standpoint. But at the same time, as we talk to customers, like, okay, is this just like the metaverse, right? It's like the overnight hype. But a lot of them realize, especially us too, as a software company, this is here to stay. And we're early in the game, but at the same time, we got to get ahead of it.
And that's again where understanding your data and the risk of not having the right data strategy. It's not an add-on to digital transformation. It is fundamental to everything because AI is not just automating the workplace, making it easier for us to communicate and share and exchange and provide a better outcome for citizens and consumers. It is a fundamental step change in the way everything happens. You can't afford to not embrace it, but the risks of running in wild without guardrails and foundations in place, you can't afford to do that either. And that's really the first time. Look, we've all seen commercial enterprise organizations that have had huge data breaks. We've certainly seen government that's had huge consequences. And I think that it is requiring a much more nuanced discussion uh, for all of us to be having with our clients as trusted advisors.
Well said. The other thing I was thinking about as you were mentioning that is there's this eagerness to want to monetize the opportunity of AI. So once again, there's that balance question. As I do speak to investors often about the opportunities, the eagerness is more how fast can we increase the recurring revenue stream with AI? And so it's always a balance of running pilot programs to understand if the quality of output can drive demand for these technologies, ensure the use case is just right, and that the value of output drives strong benefits of return. But in doing so, we must also ensure that the regulation is not getting in the way, but instead adding the guardrails to make sure the trust is where it needs to be. I think this is where the durability of growth can be for a company, especially if they're looking to increase their market cap with these solutions.
Yeah, and we're going to see that the SaaS model and the think big, start small, scale fast is flying high, and you can monetize and become the next small little company in Redmond.
Yeah, it's not just another blue screen to death, right?
Yes, yeah, or the Apple. Remember the bomb? I'm old enough to remember the
Yeah,
Apple
yeah,
bomb
yeah.
that would come up when I was writing my doctorate.
Right, the color wheel, right? Well, Julia, it's an awesome conversation. We can keep going, and but we're respectful of your time. We're respectful of all the other wisdom you're going to impart on other organizations and people around the world. So before we wrap up, we like to end the podcast with a very clear takeaway to our listeners and how to deal with the shift happening around their digital workplace. So when it comes to risk management and digital workplace transformation, what do you recommend for those organizations who want to make the shift happen?
Really, it's always going back to basics. Understand where you are, be very clear about where you want to go and why, then do the gap analysis. I think that's your foundation. Then don't push an organization too far too fast. I have taken on big transformation change roles in my career. And if you ask me, what have I learned or what mistake did I make? It's been obvious to me where things need to go. And I think everybody gets it because 1 and 1 is 2. And I wasn't sensitive that people are at different places. They bring different mindsets and backgrounds and risk appetites to the table. And you have to bring people along with you. So know where you are, know where you want to go, what you need to do to get there. And then make sure you're bringing your organization and your people along. You're not going too fast in that race to monetize or, improve or modernize. That would be they're fundamentals, but easy mistakes to make if you forget them. Don't chase the shiny toy.
That's right. Julia, this has been a great conversation. We've covered so many factors, and listening to your examples and perspectives will accelerate our learnings and understanding of these shifts. We're looking forward to continuing our conversations with you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast.
Thanks for listening. In today's episode, we learned that embracing AI in the digital workplace requires collaboration and a nuanced approach. Key takeaways include the importance of understanding your organization's goals, conducting a gap analysis, and avoiding the temptation to rush the process. Remember, it's crucial to bring people along and not lose sight of the human touch while leveraging the power of AI in the digital workplace. If you like today's episode, subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. See you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.